speed in other programs. And while I'm able to scan a local run, developers can't always go to Utah or another one of Quixel's biomes, which range from rainforests to tundras. Suddenly, everyone can make their game alien planet without having a job.
Even though I'm not in the desert, it is super hot right now, and sometimes developers just want to sit their desks or make guys like Galen once have to trek out and eat lunch in the desert.
Push Sam, you know what I mean? Double cheese.
For Epic, these scans and textures were collected are for the technology demo of the company's graphics supercharged Unreal Engine 5. It's a flywheel for Epic Games and Quixel, where scans make Unreal Engine better, and better Unreal Engine means more Unreal Engine games, which means more people want to add scans that work with Unreal Engine. That also means it's eminently practical to send a crew of non-geologists deep into the desert to photograph rocks.
In 2016, I was working in the Amazon warehouse when my brother passed away, and a couple of years later, my mother passed away. After taking care of them, I knew that I really wanted to become a nurse. Amazon helped me with training and tuition. Today, I'm a medical student and studying to become a nurse.
For most of us, thinking is at least somewhat unpleasant. We try to avoid it where possible. For example, I asked these guys, how long does it take for the Earth to go around the Sun?
Obviously, that is.
Or take this problem, which has been given to thousands of college students. You go into a toy store, and there's a toy bat and a toy ball. Together they cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost?
All wrong,
What? If you think about it for just a second, it's obvious the ball can't cost 10 cents. Because if it did, then the bat would cost $1.10 and the two items together would cost $1.20. The correct answer is 5 cents. Now the point of these questions is not that they're difficult. Any of these people could have quickly checked their answer if they wanted to. The point is that they don't check. Because thinking is uncomfortable. It takes effort.
Hey, the others take one day to get around the sun. It takes like a year.
Now I think it would be easy to put these mistakes down to stupidity and believe that you, being much smarter, could never fall into such traps. But then I think you'd be fooling yourself. I think these examples reveal blind spots in all of our thinking due to the fundamental way that our brains work. Now, one way of modeling how the brain operates is as though there are two systems at work. Psychologists call them System 1 and System 2, but maybe it's useful to think of them as characters. So let's call System 1 Gun and System 2 Drew. You are Drew. He represents your conscious thought, the voice in your head. I am who you think you are. He's the one capable of following instructions. He can execute a series of steps. If you were asked to calculate 13 times 17 in your head, for example, he's the one who has to do it. Can I just use my calculator? No. Drew is lazy. It takes effort to get Drew to do anything, and he is slow, but he's a careful one, capable of catching and fixing mistakes. 21. Now meet System 1, Gun. He is incredibly quick, which he needs to be since he's constantly processing copious amounts of information coming in through your senses. He picks out the relevant bits and discards the rest, which is most of it. And he works automatically, without you, Drew, being consciously aware of what he is doing. For example, when you spot some text, he reads it before you can even decide whether or not you want to read it. Gun fills in the gaps. For example, what does this say? Did you notice that the H in the and the A in cat are actually the same symbol? But you had no trouble reading it because because Gunn made the correct automatic assumption. So although Drew is unaware of what Gunn is doing, it's Gunn's perceptions that become the basis for your conscious thoughts. The way I like to think of it, each of these characters is related to one of your main memory structures. Gunn's automatic responses are made possible by long-term memory, the library of experiences you've built up over your lifetime. In contrast, Drew exists entirely within working memory, so he's only capable of holding 4 or 5 novel things in mind at a time. This is perhaps one of the best known findings from psychology, that our capacity to hold and manipulate novel information is incredibly limited, like when trying to remember a string of random numbers.
6, 7, 5, 5, 3, 1.
Yes. But we are able to overcome these limitations if the information is familiar to us. For example, let me give you 4 random digits. 7, 1, 0, 2. Now these would normally take up most of your working memory capacity just to remember, but if you reverse them, 2017, they're now just one thing, the present year. The process of grouping things together according to prior knowledge is called chunking, and you can actually hold 4 or 5 chunks in working memory at once. So the larger the chunk, the more information you can actively manipulate at one time. Learning is then the process of building more and bigger chunks by storing and further connecting information in long-term memory, essentially passing off tasks from Drew to Gunn. But in order for this to happen, Drew first has to engage with the information actively and effortfully, often multiple times. For example, when you were first learning to tie your shoelaces, you probably recited a rhyme to help you remember what to do next, using up all your working memory in this process. But after doing it over and over and over again, it gradually became automatic. That is, Drew doesn't have to think about it anymore because Gunn got it. Musicians and sports stars refer to this as muscle memory. So of course the memory is not in the muscle, it's still in the brain, just controlled by Gunn.
You can practice everything exactly as it is, exactly as it's written, but at just such a speed that you have to think about and know exactly where you are and what your fingers are doing and what it feels like.
Slow, deliberate, conscious practice repeated often enough leads to this. I bet 99% of the time, what appears to be superhuman ability comes down to the incredible automation skills of Gunn, developed through the painstaking, deliberate practice of Drew. What's interesting is it's actually possible to see how hard Drew is working just by looking at something. Try this task. I'm going to show you 4 digits. I want you to read them out loud, and then after 2 beats, I want you to say each number back on the beat, but adding 1 to each digit. So as an example, 7291 should be 8302. This is called the add 1 task, and it forces Drew to hold these digits in memory while making manipulations. And it's important to say the numbers back on the beat. Try this one. To make it harder, you can try adding 3 instead of 1. Ready? Now what you're unaware of is that as you're completing this task, your pupils are dilating. When Drew is hard at work, as he is in this task, you have a physiological response, including increased heart rate, sweat production, and pupil dilation. Watch how the pupils of these participants enlarge as they perform the add 1 and add 3 tasks.
4, 3, 9, 7, 2. 5, 4, 0, 8, 3.
Excellent. Nicely done. That's the point. When this research was originally carried out, the researchers made a surprising observation. When the participants were not engaged in the task but were just chatting with the experimenters, their pupils didn't really dilate at all. This indicates that the add 1 and add 3 tasks are particularly strenuous for System 2, and that most of our day-to-day life is a stroll for Drew, with most tasks handled automatically by Gunn. Just as we spend a lot of our lives lounging around, our brains spend most of their time doing the mental equivalent. And I don't mean to make that sound like a bad thing. This is how our brains evolved to make the best use of resources. For repetitive tasks, we developed automatic ways of doing things, reserving Drew's limited capacity for things that really need our attention. But in some circumstances, there can be mix-ups. For example, I moved to Australia in 2004, and one of the first things I learned was that to turn the lights on, you flip the switch down. My whole life growing up in Canada, guns had automated that up means on. So no matter how well I, Drew, knew that down was on in Australia, I would, for years, continually switch the lights off when entering a room and on when leaving. When Destin learned to ride a backwards bicycle, with its steering reversed, it took months to overcome his automated habit. And once he had done that, he couldn't easily go back to riding a normal bike. Understanding Gun and Drew also explains errors in the basketball play. The gun who first perceives the key pieces of information. Together, the basketball costs $10, the bat costs $1 more than the ball costs 10 cents. 10 cents. Gun immediately had an answer that he blurted out automatically. Meanwhile, Drew, without being consciously aware that the answer came from Gun, endorsed the idea without checking. After all, the answer sounded reasonable and Drew is lazy. So how do you get Drew to do more work? Well, researchers have found at least one way. When they gave out a clearly printed test, including the basketball questions to incoming college students, 85% got at least one wrong. But when they printed the test in a hard-to-read font with poor contrast, the error rate dropped to 35%. A harder-to-read test resulted in more correct answers. And the explanation for this is simple. Since Gun can't quickly jump to an answer, he hands off the task to Drew, who then invests the required mental effort to reason his way to the correct answer. When something is confusing, Drew works harder. And when Drew works harder, you're more likely to reach the right answer and remember the experience. This is something I think the advertising industry knows about and is using to its advantage. A few years ago, again in Australia, I saw a giant billboard that had just 2 letters on it. Hun. There was no logo, no indication of what it was for, and this seems to go against all the basic principles of advertising. To show what the product does, how it's better than the competition, and use clear branding and maybe a jingle to make it memorable. The goal is usually to make the message as easy to understand as possible so Drew doesn't have to work very hard. But if you look at a lot of effective advertising today, it's changed to be more confusing. As the Un campaign rolled out across Sydney, I saw ads like this one in bus shelters. Unexplained. With Un, there is no stress, just unstress. No hassle, just unhassle. With Un, you can undo what you did. You can undrive to the car wash with the window down, or unbreak dance in front of your teenage son and his mates. Un makes life relaxing and unreal. Un your life. Be happy and live for now. Don't worry, unworry. Can you guess what the ads were for? They're actually for insurance. Now that advertising is everywhere, Gun is skilled at filtering it out. It's automatic. If I just saw another insurance ad, I never would have given it a second thought. But something that doesn't make sense, that's something Gun can't deal with, so he hands it off to Drew. This same realization has capacity in education. Lectures, which have long been the dominant teaching method, are now on the decline. Like the old form of advertising, they're too easy to tune out. And often, especially in science lectures, too many new pieces of information are presented, and that exceeds Drew's capacity because he doesn't have big enough chunks to break through. In place of lectures, universities are introducing workshops, peer instructions, and formats where students are forced to answer more questions, do more work, and this will undoubtedly make Drew work harder, which is good because that's how learning happens. But a lot of students don't like it because it requires more effort. Just as it's hard to motivate someone to get off the couch and exercise, it's hard to get groups to give its full effort. There's an appeal to doing things you already know. For the musician to play the same familiar songs that Gun has already automated that feel and sound good. To watch videos that give you the sensation of understanding without actually learning anything. To always drive with a GPS on so you never get lost, but you also never learn the way. If you really want to learn and get better at anything, have any chance of becoming an expert, you have to be willing to be uncomfortable. Because thinking takes effort. It involves fighting through confusion, and for most of us, that's at least somewhat unpleasant.
Helps make your writing clear and concise, no matter where you are. Compose a cover letter that stands out, thanks to flawless writing and compelling word choice. Inspire your team with a presentation free of errors in spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Impress your boss with a proposal that gets straight to the point. And be sure your writing comes across the way you intend. Download Grammarly today to review your writing before you hit send.
Hello? Have you made it big on Broadway yet?
Competition is fierce.
There's only one Barbie.
Honey, you should take that. I made a new friend. And guess what her name is?
I'm Barbie. Barbie Roberts. We have to...
The second law of thermodynamics tells us that everything in the universe tends towards disorder. And in complex systems, chaos is the norm. So you naturally expect the universe to be messy. And yet, we can observe occasions of spontaneous order. The synchronization of metronomes, the perfectly timed orbits of moons, the simultaneous flashes of fireflies, and even the regular beating of your heart. What puts these things in order in spite of nature's tendency for disorder? This video was sponsored by KiwiCo. More about them at the end of the video. On June 10, 2000, the Millennium Bridge, a new footbridge across the River Thames in London, was opened to much excitement. But as crowds filled the bridge, it began to wobble back and forth. Police started restricting access to the bridge, but that only resulted in long lines to get on. The wobble was unaffected. 2 days later, the bridge, which had cost £18 million, was fully closed, and it wouldn't reopen for another 2 years. So what went wrong? Well, it's long been known that armies should break step when crossing bridges. This dates back to an accident in 1831, when 74 men from the 60th Rifle Corps were marching across the Broughton Suspension Bridge in northern England. It collapsed under their synchronized footsteps. 60 men fell into the river, 20 of whom suffered injuries like broken bones or concussions. Luckily, no one was killed. But after this, the British Army ordered all troops to break step when crossing bridges. Now, look at the people walking across the Millennium Bridge. Most of them are walking in step with each other. But they are not part of an army, they're random members of the public, so why are they walking together? And why couldn't a modern bridge designed for heavy pedestrian traffic handle this? Well, to understand it, we have to go back 350 years. In 1656, famous Dutch physicist Christian Huygens created the first working pendulum clock. The goal was to help sailors figure out where they were on the road. Latitude can be judged by measuring the position of the sun or stars, but for longitude, you also need to know the time at some fixed location, say your home port. But clocks at the time were routinely out by around 15 minutes a day, so they were effectively useless. Huygens' pendulum clocks, by contrast, were accurate to around 10 to 15 per day. Huygens' plan was to attach his clocks to a heavy hanging mass on the ship, so they wouldn't get tossed around by the rolling seas. His plan called for 2 clocks in case one stopped or was damaged. But testing out this arrangement while at home sick in February 1665, he made a remarkable discovery. 2 of his clocks hung from a wood beam across some chairs. Watching the pendulums sway back and forth for hours, he noticed after half an hour or so, they would spontaneously synchronize. As one clock swung one way, the second would swing the other way. As one was sick, the other would tolerate. So he tried disturbing the clocks. He set them ticking out of sync, but again, within 30 minutes or so, they were back to the same clock step. Huygens thought this strange sympathy of clocks must have been caused by air currents between the pendulums, so he placed a large board in between them. But the clocks continued to sync up. It wasn't the air current. When he separated the clocks, the synchrony would disappear, their times drifting apart. But when he brought them back together, the synchrony returned. Huygens realized the 2 clocks were synchronizing because they were hung from the same wood beam. He transferred mechanical vibrations from one clock to the other, making the 2 oscillators coupled. Huygens was the first to observe this kind of spontaneous synchronization in inanimate objects. And although he qualitatively described what was happening, it was only a few decades ago that scientists started fleshing out a rigorous theory of synchronization. You may have seen this demo where you put several metronomes on a light, wobbly platform and start them out of sync. It's trickier than people make it look. When you do get it to work, though, it's kind of magical. These metronomes don't have exactly the same natural frequency, and yet they still beat in time. To understand how this works, it's easiest to first consider a couple metronomes oscillating in sync with each other. When the large masses accelerate to the left, they push the platform to the right, and when they accelerate to the right, they push the platform to the left. So the center of mass of the system always stays roughly in the same spot. Now, if you start another metronome completely out of sync with the first two, the motion of the platform gives it a kick every half swing, speeding it up until it's in time with the first two. This works regardless of the number of metronomes you have. The platform just goes whichever way the majority of metronomes are pushing it.
The truth is that Hollywood's elite actors can get ripped while adding 12, 15, 20 pounds of muscle because they follow a long-forgotten and suppressed by the fitness industry secret that was used for generations of bodybuilding athletes before steroids were even invented.
I get further and further in. By the time I hit the 90 days, I had lost right at 30 pounds. My jeans were falling off.
I have great results. I went from 214 pounds down to 184 now. As of this morning, I am down 33 total pounds.
The results I put out were fantastic. They got the mood and body fat, and it did exactly what I said in the routine, and I got pretty ripped.
I lost 53 pounds. I would say that it far exceeded my expectations.
You want to know why running on the treadmill 7 days a week doesn't work for you sometimes with weights? It's because it never has. And I know that's hard to believe, but it's true. Cardio actually burns calories, usually in the form of carbs, in the bloodstream that are then replaced with very negative stored as more fat. This is why when you even eat low-calorie food or run for an hour a day, that you get softer, but you don't actually lose weight. And this is one of the biggest reasons why most weight loss fail within the first week. I don't do an hour cardio. I have never done an hour cardio in the past 5 or 6 years, and I can stay something like that years out. Well, I have to do that. You don't have to do that. Say, well, I can't do the diet, you're always hungry all the time. You follow a diet where you're not hungry. Say, I'm not in shape because I don't know nutrition, so I don't know what to do. Well, here's a chance to put all those myths to rest and exactly what you get in shape. What shape you're in right now and what shape you want to be.
Started off all jiggly, fat, and I hated the way it felt. And I knew where I wanted to go, I didn't know how to get there. So I ran across Shred on Facebook, and I thought, well, if I can get to where I want to go faster, sign me up, let's do it. And it was a great decision.
With all those failed path attempts to try dealing with the fat around your belly, do you really think that this time is going to be any different? I mean, how long are you going to keep trying on your own? The rest of your life? Now, if I was your trainer and I knew exactly how to support you for belly fat, do you think that you'd get better results than working out on your own? Of course you would. So let me help you. There is a simple way to completely transform your physique in as little as 12 weeks, like, say, Hugh Jackman did for the Wolverine movie. But to transform himself into the superhero, Jackman followed some of the secrets that I'll reveal to you. Chris Pratt went from the chubby, lovable Andy on Parks and Rec to the cover of Men's Fitness, sporting a killer set of abs. What's their secret? They ruthlessly cut through the fluff and the BS. They have zero time to waste because their next film role is starting in just a few weeks. So they can't waste time on the wrong program.
I've done other programs and never really had much success, but this workout program, the B-Shred, altogether is a great program, and my self-esteem is through the roof.
Is fruit bad for your diet? You should know that the advice to eat plenty of fruits and vegetables is gravely flawed. This is exactly where many diet books and trainers and dietitians run into trouble. They recommend eating fruit because of the high vitamin content, but they completely ignore fructose. Is fructose good for you? That answer is unfortunately complicated. There's no doubt that fruits offer a slew of health benefits, vitamins, minerals, fiber, and phytonutrients. But the fructose complicates the issue for most people, especially women. Well, guess what? These same rules apply to a lot of vegetables as well. And I know it's enough to make your head spin. How can you possibly know which fruits to eat, how often, and how much? The truth is, when people say that they're going to get in shape, they do two things. Tell me if this sounds familiar to you. One, they start eating less, because the only way to lose weight is to burn off more calories than you consume. That's just science. And two, they start doing more cardio, jogging, riding the bike, doing the elliptical, because they want to increase how many calories they're burning to lose weight faster. But what if I told you that when you do this, you're actually hurting yourself? Now, I don't have an answer for you yet, or you can pick up a wall between eventually quitting. But if you're interested in hearing why these very common things never actually work, click the link on this video and take my body type quiz. When you click it, it'll take you to a quick 30-second quiz where you'll answer just 6 easy questions. And after answering those 6 questions, we don't need your email or any information from you, but it will take you to a video where I explain why these things don't work and the 3 most important things to do in order to be into better shape than you were in once you get there. So, click that link, and I'll see you in a second.
I recommend this to a lot of my friends. Really, just give it a shot. You're going to love it. I mean, it worked for me. It's working for thousands of people, so the proof is in the pudding. Look at the results. I mean, what do you got to lose?
We can represent the position of a metronome pendulum or any other oscillator as a point on a circle. This shows its phase, that is, what part of the cycle it's in. So you could call the rightmost point of the pendulum 0 degrees, and the leftmost point is 180 degrees. And as the pendulum oscillates back and forth, the point goes around the circle. The higher the frequency of the oscillator, the faster that point goes around. So this represents 2 metronomes with different frequencies, and this represents 2 metronomes with the same frequency, but completely out of phase. When the metronomes are synchronized in phase, their dots go around the circle together. We can use this depiction to illustrate a mathematical model for the synchronizing behavior we've been looking at. It's called the Kuramoto model. It says the rate each dot goes around the circle equals its natural frequency plus some amount related to how far it is from all the other dots. Now the size of this term is determined by the coupling strength.
I like to think of it actually visually by thinking about people that are running around a track. Like suppose you're running with your friend, and maybe your friend is faster than you. Your friend says, come on, move it, hurry it up, because you're dawdling, you're slow, you're falling behind. So if you have enough fortitude and you try hard enough, and if the friend is sympathetic enough to slow down, then the coupling between you is strong enough to overcome that inherent difference in your natural running speeds. But if you're not very good friends, or if you can't quite suck it up to move yourself faster, then the coupling will not be strong enough to overcome that difference, and one person will start laughing the other.
The fireflies of Southeast Asia are apparently good enough friends because they synchronize their flashes. Even though each one has its own particular frequency at which it likes to flash, they couple to each other strongly enough so that hundreds, even thousands, can flash together in the same split second. There's a great simulation of this by Nicky Case. You start with individual fireflies just doing their thing, and then you can turn on the interaction between them. Now in the Kuromoto model, this would mean every firefly has an effect on every other one. But in this simulation, a firefly is only affected by its neighbors. If it sees a flash close by, it nudges its internal clock forward a little bit, so it'll flash sooner than it would have otherwise. Now, what's remarkable about this is even though the interactions are small and close range, over time you can see waves traveling through all the fireflies, and eventually they're all flashing at once.
Like you might think, if you increase the coupling, you just sort of gradually get a system more and more synchronous. That's not what happens. It's sort of like the way water doesn't gradually freeze as you lower the temperature. It's water, water, water as you're lowering the temperature, and then at a critical temperature, the molecules suddenly start to change their state and become solid instead of liquid. And this is a sort of time, rather than space, version of the same thing. They sort of lock their phases in time once you pass a critical level of coupling. And at that point, the sort of crystallization in time is the phenomenon that we call synchronization.
This is an audience in Budapest applauding after a performance. But what happens next is completely spontaneous. They're not being instructed by anyone. See if you can spot the phase transition.
This phenomenon of synchronization that we've been talking about, one of the things that I find most appealing about it is how universal it is. That it occurs at every scale of nature, from subatomic to cosmic. It uses every communication channel that nature has ever devised, from gravitational interactions, electrical interactions, chemical, mechanical. I mean, you name it. Any way that two things can influence each other, nature uses that to get things in sync.
Take our own moon, for example. We only ever see one side of it because it rotates on its axis exactly once for every time it goes around the Earth. We say it is tidally locked to the Earth. And this is a common effect. In our solar system, there are 34 moons that are tidally locked to their planet. The way this happens goes something like this. A moon starts out with its own rotational frequency, but the gravitational attraction to the planet is stronger on the side closer to the planet, so it distorts the moon into an egg shape, which is greatly exaggerated here. As the moon continues to orbit and rotate on its axis, those bulges swing out of alignment with the planet. So the gravitational force on them is constantly pulling them back into alignment, and this slows the rotation of the moon until it is locked to the planet. If the moon is initially rotating too slowly, this same mechanism can speed it up until it's locked. There are all kinds of other beautiful synchronization phenomena in our solar system. The three innermost moons of Jupiter, Io, Europa, and Ganymede, are not only tidally locked to the planet, they're also in a 1-2-4 orbital resonance with each other. For every time Ganymede goes around Jupiter, Europa goes around twice, and Io 4 times. In the 1950s, some Russian chemists went looking for a chemical reaction that would oscillate, like a chemical analog of a pendulum.
Like, could you get something going back and forth, say, between blue and orange, over and over again? And naively, you might say that's impossible because there's principles of thermodynamics which say that closed systems just increase their entropy over time, that they're just going to come to equilibrium. But there's no principle in chemistry or thermodynamics that says you have to go monotonically to equilibrium. You are allowed to oscillate and damp out to equilibrium in an oscillatory way.
This is exactly what Boris Belousov and later Anatol Zhabotinsky discovered. So this reaction is known as the Belousov-Zhabotinsky or BZ reaction. I've sped it up because it can continue for half an hour or more,
oscillating between these colors. Now it spends more time on the burnt orange color, so I've sped up those sections more.
It's very spectacular, and it's kind of shocking to see a chemical reaction doing these periodic changes in color. Like chemicals acting like a clock, like a pendulum. So the stirred reaction has the advantage that you really get a sense of the collectivity of, I don't know, quadrillions of molecules, Avogadro's number of molecules, all doing the same thing at the same time. On the other hand, if you don't stir, if you just put like a petri dish of the BZ reaction, you can see something even more amazing, I think, which is that you can see spiral waves of color or target patterns, expanding circles of color moving through the liquid. Maybe I should emphasize, the liquid itself is not moving. It's not like we're seeing ripples on a pond. But what's not still is chemical concentrations. You can see these blue waves in the BZ reaction that are chemical waves, not water waves. And they will just propagate. And they move at a constant speed, or they can look like a spiral that just grows and grows and spins around. And what's really spooky and uncanny about this is that the same phenomenon is seen in the heart. You can see spiral waves of electrical excitation in a heart that look exactly like the spiral waves in chemical oscillations and chemical waves in the BZ reaction. And this was the sort of thing that inspired my mentor, a guy named Art Winfrey, who used chemical reaction waves to give himself insight into cardiac arrhythmias. You know, you may have heard the most deadly kind of arrhythmia, the kind that will kill you really in a matter of minutes, ventricular arrhythmias, ventricular fibrillation in particular. Winfrey's work, seeing these rotating spirals on hearts, as well as in chemistry, led him to a theory about what's really causing ventricular fibrillation. And how could we design, for example, better defibrillators that are gentler? That could be a good outcome of this theory. You know, the lack of synchronization in a fibrillated heart is what causes no blood to be pumped, and then sudden death ensues.
So too little synchronization is obviously a problem, but too much synchronization can also cause trouble. Remember the wobbly Millennium Bridge?
It was all apparently down to something called crowd synchrony.
Was it the people walking in step that caused it to oscillate? Actually, it's kind of the opposite. The Millennium Bridge was designed to look like a ribbon of light, so its construction is unique. Unlike a typical suspension bridge, its supporting cables run alongside it, stretched taut like guitar strings.
In the civil engineering literature, all designers know that you do not build a footbridge with a resonant frequency equal to the frequency of human walking. So we take about 2 strides per second, one with your left foot, one with your right foot. So everybody who takes civil engineering knows if people are going to walk on the bridge, they better not have a resonant frequency in the vertical direction of 2 hertz. Okay, everybody knows that, including the people who built the Millennium Bridge. But what they didn't know, and what was new that day, is that half the frequency is also important. A frequency of 1 cycle a second, which is the frequency with which you put down, say, your left foot. Half the time you're doing your left foot. So why does that matter? Because when you're walking across a bridge and you put your left foot down, you put a tiny force sideways on the bridge. And normally that wouldn't matter because people are all walking at their own pace, they're not synchronized. So their sideways forces, which are only about a tenth as big as their downward forces that they impart on the bridge, that would be negligible and it wouldn't do anything to the bridge. But if the bridge happens to have a sideways frequency of 1 cycle a second, which the Millennium Bridge it happened did, then people can actually start to get the bridge moving a little bit.
After the bridge was closed, engineers got their colleagues to walk across it in increasing numbers while they measured its acceleration. With 50 people on the bridge, there was very little motion. At 100, the vibrations had barely increased. At 156, there was still no wobble. But with just 10 more people, 166, the acceleration grew dramatically. The bridge swayed just like it had on opening day. The system had undergone a phase transition.
If it's moving a little, it turns out people don't like to walk on a platform that's moving a little bit sideways. If you've ever been in a train that's kind of going faster, you stand up in a rowboat and start to move sideways. People spread their legs apart to try to stabilize themselves. And they will actually start to walk in step with the sideways motion of the bridge. You can see footage from the BBC of people doing that. It's spectacular and crazy.
So it wasn't people walking in sync that got the bridge to wobble, it was the wobbling bridge that got people to walk in sync.
So as the people got in step with the motion of the bridge, I'm adopting this weird kind of penguin, they ended up inadvertently pumping more energy into the bridge and making its motion worse. And so this was this positive feedback loop.